Hey, how you doing? Brian Cain, host of the Mental Performance Mastery podcast, and super excited for today's guest, Angie Asche. She's the author of Fuel Your Body, How to Cook for Peak Performance. She's one of the top sports nutrition coaches in all of the sporting world, especially in baseball, where we've cross-pollinated on a lot of clients. So super excited to bring Angie here to talk about her book, talk about sports nutrition, and what you should do as an elite performer to maximize your performance. Angie, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Brian. I'm so excited to talk all things performance nutrition with you.
Yeah, no, I know. We've met many times through our clients that we both kind of have the privilege of getting to serve, and just excited to be able to help kind of shine a light on your book and you and your work that you're doing that's making such a huge impact. So maybe to get us started, just kind of give us like your background into how you got into what you're doing now as a sports nutrition coach.
Yeah, sure. So started back actually in high school. I was a competitive athlete myself, and I personally struggled with a lot of GI issues, just wasn't seeing any progress in my performance. I was a swimmer and a dancer, and I just really was feeling sluggish. So kind of just through my own research and own kind of just process of elimination, I found, oh, this is an issue with my diet and what I'm eating. And so my dad kind of helped me along the way too, because he was a sports medicine doctor for many years. And so he kind of pointed out like, well, why don't you, meet with a sports dietitian and kind of see what that's all about. And I didn't even know it existed at the time. Found it absolutely fascinating. I immediately found just how much of an impact nutrition has on your performance. And it was just really a light bulb moment of why is everyone not taking advantage of this? This is so interesting. And just, it really does make such a difference in your performance. So kind of fast forward to college, I thought, and going into grad school, I thought I wanted to work for a collegiate team. I thought, at that time, sports dietitians were mainly just only working full-time at universities. I thought that was kind of like what I was going to do. But then I got the experience of working with a bunch of different athletes at an athletic training center. So kind of like an off-season center where a bunch of athletes would go, ranging from NFL players to MLB, and then a ton of like college and smaller college athletes coming in, high school kids coming in that were really competitive. And I got to work with them one-on-one all the time. And I thought, this is so cool. I'm meeting with such a wide range of individuals, with such a wide range of teams. And so then kind of that sparked my interest in doing something outside of that collegiate setting. And then my husband, Cody, he played professional baseball for 10 years before now being he's now a major league coach. And so at the time he was playing for the Phillies, and I was finishing up grad school, and I really wanted to be able to also live with him and travel with him and get to experience the crazy baseball life with him. And so I kind of just left my job at that athletic training center I love so much and kind of went headfirst into private practice. I had had a little bit of experience kind of watching other people and how that worked with private practice, but otherwise I was just completely like, just let's do this. Let's try this out. And I really just felt like baseball especially was who I connected with the most, because I've lived it through every level. We've been together for 15 years. So like I've truly seen like everything from college baseball to the summer ball to getting drafted to minor leagues and all of the really, really ugly moments that people have to go through that a lot of the media doesn't shine much of a light on. Like I've lived through it. And so I thought it was really cool that I could now be that sports dietitian for the athlete that is in free agency, right? He's in between teams. He doesn't have any nutrition expert to really talk to because he's not affiliated with a team. Or maybe someone who, like in the case of my husband, he was on 3 teams in 1 year. Like you're not going to start over with a new team dietitian every time you get to a new team. So really cool that I just kind of get to be that person for the athlete, regardless of where they're at, and through the off season and spring training and everything else. So kind of a little bit of a long-winded response of how I got to where I am, but yeah.
Well, and the cool part about it is, like you talked about your husband playing on 3 different teams in 1 season. As the player moves, you go with them, right? And I think that's the advantage is you are a part of the player's team versus say you're an employee of XYZ organization and you can only work with the players in that organization. Like the players invest with you and you go with them wherever they go. And I think that's so important with the consistency when you're talking about like how to cook and eat for peak performance. So when we boil it down into how to cook and eat for peak performance, what do you feel like are the most important things that a pro athlete needs to know about how to cook and eat for peak performance?
Well, I think it goes down to, I mean, control the controllables, right?
Mm,
So like you obviously you work with mental health, and I feel like I try to take as much of the mental load off of the athlete. So like in that situation of now they're going from one team to the next, that is where you have a huge stressful moment here. And what can you do in that situation to really take hold of your nutrition? And so I think having that just very basic knowledge on cooking is so important, because you're going to be in situations where maybe there's not a lot of places nearby that you can get, healthy fast food options
yep.
from. So you need to have a really good, at least just general basis of how can I prepare a healthy meal? And then you need to know, what is a healthy meal? What is that made up of? Like, what does that even look like? So I talk a lot about having like 4 different components on a plate. And so I think if you can at least just take the simplest of meal that you feel like you could realistically make at home, and then try to make sure that those 4 components are present, I think that's a
Mm,
really good starting point. So for this athlete, let's say listening, who has very little cooking background, all right, and let's say you're trying to take all your nutrition, you want to start making dinner, I would first ask the question, okay, what are you most comfortable with? Maybe they'll say like a taco meal. Like, okay, I could probably handle tacos. It's pretty easy. So I would want to first look at the protein component of their dish. So can they choose a leaner source of protein, and where is that source coming from? Those are questions that I would like to ask. So if it's let's say beef, ideally they would choose something that's maybe 93% lean or 90% lean, something like that, so that they're really prioritizing that protein content of that dish and keeping the fat content low. And I mean, we can really get into the nitty gritty about why that is and why that fat compares to a different type of fat than, say, something like almonds.
yep.
But otherwise, that's going to be one component of, okay, let's get your protein on the plate, and then let's educate you on how to actually cook that protein. And then the next step would be getting some sort of carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are truly our number one fuel source during high intensity exercise. And I know I talk a lot about baseball here, but baseball in particular, it's not a sport that you really think about like high carb needs, because it's a pretty slow sport.
Mm,
But in someone like, let's say, a starting pitcher, for example, they actually have pretty high carbohydrate needs. So that's something where I want to make sure that there's some source of carbohydrates there, especially something that has a little bit of fiber, some antioxidants in there, so that it can help with that muscle recovery process. So maybe you have, if you are fine with whole grain tortillas, you could do something like that for your carb. And then maybe you do some brown rice, something thrown in there for a little bit more carbohydrates. And then obviously I want some form of good, healthy fats in there. So maybe you've got some avocados, something in there to top it off with some healthy fats. Obviously there's way more antioxidants and vitamins and minerals I could get into there too. But then some sort of color is the last component. So the color is really important, and it's what's lacking in a lot of professional athletes' diets. And that's one thing where, especially in terms of muscle recovery, that's one thing I really want athletes to focus on prioritizing heading into your season or wherever you are in your training. It's just so important for muscle recovery. So getting some sort of color. I love bell peppers because they're rich in vitamin C, have even more vitamin C than oranges. So that's something you could easily
mm.
just, throw on there. You could even eat them raw. If you're like, I don't even want to saute these in a pan, just put them on there raw. And then that way you're getting a little bit of vegetables in there. So see, you can really see there's not much cooking involved in there, and you've got a pretty easy dinner that you can throw together that has all 4 of those components: the protein, the carbs, the fat, and the color.
Yeah. So as I got that, the 4 different components of a winning plate: proteins, carbs, fats, and color. And I think it's, when you look at the little bit of sports nutrition that I know, right? You look at the back of any label and there's macro and micronutrients. The macros, your fat, carb, and proteins; your micros, everything else. So you just kind of hit on the 3 macros in color. Talk about the importance, and if you would, about like just getting started. I feel like there's so much depth that you can go to and so much depth that you cover in your book, which is awesome. For the player that's just getting started going, man, what do I do? Talk about the importance of just like understanding the 3 macros and how to use that in terms of fueling for performance.
Sure. So we'll start with carbohydrates. So obviously there's better forms of carbohydrates than others. And so when it comes to athletic performance, you really do want to focus on, especially around training, you do want simple carbs. So you want something that's quickly digested, but you don't want something that's going to be very low in nutritional value, especially if what I see happening with a lot of athletes is they don't eat enough during the day, or their meal frequency is just, it's not frequent enough
Mhm.
depending on the person. And so you really do have to take advantage of as much, nutrient density as you can. So why not choose, instead of something like a Gatorade sports drink, for example, like sure, you get those simple sugars and you get that benefit of having an immediate source of carbs, but you're also not getting any micronutrients. So instead, if you did something like whole fruit, that is truly one of, I think, athletes' best friends. You could do watermelon, you could do bananas, you could do oranges. Those are just such simple sources of carbohydrates that are easily digested. They're also hydrating. Something like watermelon is like 95, 98% water. So that's also really helpful for hydration. And then you're also getting some really good, obviously, micronutrients in there. So you're getting some vitamins and minerals in there that will help in that muscle recovery process. So think of carbohydrates more so as not just that sugar source, but something that's going to also provide some vitamins and minerals. So fruits in that category, vegetables, starchy vegetables, especially like sweet potatoes. You could get, regular potatoes are great too. Just a whole russet potatoes got 30% vitamin C. So whole grains are a great option too. I'm trying to think what else. Oats are a great option. I know social media is like demonizing oatmeal right now, but you can absolutely still have oats. They're a great nutritious option and have some good fiber in there. And then to try to limit, of course, the refined carbohydrates as much as you can, just because, especially from a body composition perspective, they're not really ideal. So obviously the refined sugars, refined starches, try to limit those as much as you can. That's carbohydrates. I would start there. And then what'd you say?
If I can, before you go on to the fats and the proteins, just real quick, the difference between simple and complex carbs. I hear athletes talk all the time about simple, complex, but what's the difference?
Yeah, so think more so of, and there's kind of some gray areas because some kind of fit into the simple that you wouldn't think is a simple. Like a lot of people will just say, oh, simple carbs are bad, but a lot of fruit is actually in that simple carb category too. So it's really just how it's digested. So complex carbohydrates are more so like the slower digesting carbohydrates. So think of that as like quinoa would be in that complex carbohydrate category. So you do want to really make sure that you're getting majority of your carbohydrates coming from those complex carbs because those are really good for blood sugar levels. Making sure that your blood sugar is stable. But in the form of like exercise, those simple carbs are ideal because you want something that's going to be an immediate source of glucose, especially if you're like a youth athlete. If you're in high school, you run through that glycogen store a little bit faster, so you actually have a greater demand for that. So that's something where you could definitely benefit from that. And I know a lot of players like they love honey stingers. Something like that is totally fine too, especially in the middle of the game when you need that quick acting source of sugars too.
Beautiful. And then, so understanding like complex carbs, slower to digest, think about those as like the
That's your
gas for the entire
meals.
journey. Yeah. My meals. And then if
Mm-hmm.
I'm in competition and I need a spike of energy in the moment, like a honey stinger or a clementine, which I had seen a lot of dugouts around the country, or even like, I'd hate to throw in there like Jelly Bellies or like Skittles, but just
Yeah.
something like when I do ultra running, like I love eating Skittles because I feel like it just kind of keeps me a little bit,
Right.
with the blood sugar right.
That's so funny. I have a marathoner who like swears by Sour Patch Kids. I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah, 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 yeah.
that's her go-to. So,
Yeah.
yeah, of course we don't want that to be like the bulk of your diet by any
Right.
means, but it does help, especially if you need that immediate source of energy.
Yeah.
So, that's why nutrition's so cool. It's very unique to each person. I know a lot of people love the unsweetened applesauce pouches
Yep.
too. That's another great option. Just easy
Yep.
to squeeze and have at the field too.
Nice. So you were kind of going to then talk about the other two macros of like fat
Yep.
and proteins.
Yeah, so fat's a really interesting one because we have, kind of the category of good fats and then the not so good fats. So the cool thing about a lot of the fat sources is they go far beyond just fat, but more so, they have nutrients like vitamin E that we don't think about and other fat soluble vitamins that are really important for our health. Vitamin E is an antioxidant. So for baseball and other athletes, especially, this is so important to have. A lot of them also have magnesium, especially if it's a plant source. So I'm thinking specifically of almonds, for example. So almonds have 14 grams of total fat, but 13 of those grams are monounsaturated fat, and then only 1 gram is saturated fat. They also have 50% your daily value of vitamin E in just one serving of almonds, which is
Mm.
about 23 almonds. And they have 20% your daily intake of magnesium. So you're getting so much out of these whole food sources
Mm.
of good fats compared to, if you were to say have just like a spoonful of oil or something. So, but then kind of moving forward onto to oils. So things like olive oil or avocado oil, those are great choices to have in. And especially someone who's struggling with weight gain, I look at fats often because they are more calorie dense per gram than something like carbs or protein. So it's an easy add-on. Like, all right, take your steamed broccoli, let's drizzle a couple tablespoons of olive oil on top. Boom, we've added 240 calories. So that's one way that we can kind of increase total calories too. Avocados are a great source of fats as well. So really trying to prioritize those and then limit the amount of saturated fat in your diet. So those would be things that mainly come from animal sources. The thing with high saturated fat in animal sources too is that usually when you put side by side, like let's say 4 ounces of 80% lean ground beef compared to 93% lean ground beef, you're getting way less protein in that 80% ground beef. So just switching over to that leaner meat per ounce, you're getting so much more protein and also less of that saturated fat. So that's just a really simple swap. And in general, just less calories, obviously, too, with that lower saturated fat. So that's a simple swap that you could start doing today is choose leaner sources of protein. Another protein, and then another fat source I forgot to mention is fat. So, or I'm sorry, is fish. It's fatty fish. So fatty fish like salmon is a really, really good source of omega-3 fatty acids. And for athletes especially, we need to have omega-3s daily. I mean, ideally 2 grams per day is what we're shooting for. So if you're not a fish eater already, I mean, you could potentially obviously benefit from a supplement, but it's just not the same as eating something like a piece of salmon that has the omega-3s, it's got the vitamin D, it's got the protein in there, it's got the zinc in there. You're getting so many other nutrients when you actually eat the whole food. So definitely consider getting a little bit more fish in there. Maybe if you're not into salmon, if it's too fishy, maybe start with like a white flaky fish or something like cod or halibut. But that is really important for athletes to get in consistently because that omega-3 is an anti-inflammatory fat. It's really good for so many purposes too.
Nice. So if you were to just go back to like the difference between as we hear good fats, bad fats. If you had to simplify that, what would you say? Good fats, bad fats. Here's what you need to know.
Good fats are going to be found in more, I'd say, like, again, like the almonds, like I mentioned, you'll find them in things like chia seeds, in things like flax seeds. You'll find them and then outside of plants, you'll find them in things like fatty fish.
Yep.
And then the not so good fats, you'll find them in things like cream, like butter, things that come from animals,
Yep.
like the really fatty cuts of meat, those kinds of things. The ultra processed meats, and of course, ultra processed foods too will be higher in fat. Things like potato chips are very high in fat that we don't need.
Good. Well, shifting into the protein source. So you talked about the carbohydrates, you talked about the fats. What about proteins? I mean, you kind of alluded to the difference when you're looking at your meat of an 80%, versus a 93% of your beef and the difference here, but unpack proteins and the importance and what they do and why it's so important and how much athletes should be bringing in.
Yeah, so I'll kind of go backwards with your question here. So how much athletes should be going in? I would say about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram body weight, which comes out to be about a gram per pound to keep it really easy. But this really does depend on your goals. So I would say that obviously protein needs are going to be much higher if you're trying to make significant changes to body composition. So you're either trying to gain a significant amount of muscle mass or you're trying to lose a significant amount of weight because we actually want to maintain as much obviously muscle as we can while in a calorie deficit. So those two things specifically, any drastic change in body comp, I really do have that protein high. So again, that 1.6 to 2.2 is what you could aim for. And that's again, grams per kilogram body weight, not pounds. So if you're transitioning that to body weight in pounds, you do about one gram per pound. And then as far as the types of proteins, of course, I am a huge fan of really high quality, high bioavailable protein sources. So things like eggs are not only a great source of protein, but they've got the vitamin D in there, the vitamin A in there. They've got lutein and zeaxanthin, which are really helpful for eye health. They're antioxidants. It's got choline in there too. So lots of really important nutrients that we need in just one egg. So eggs, I'm a big fan of. Obviously, like I mentioned, the fatty fish, because you've both the protein and the healthy fats in there. And then lean sources of protein would be things like, chicken, like a really lean steak or a very lean ground beef. You could obviously do some other like shellfish mixed in there too, which will be a good source of zinc. So I like to think of it beyond just the macronutrient in itself, like just protein, and like what else does it have? What other micronutrients does it have that we can cross off and check off your list of what you need? So just kind of getting a wide variety of proteins is going to be ideal in your diet. Obviously, dairy sources like yogurt or cottage cheese are a good option too. And then I'll add, if you're vegan or you're vegetarian or you just don't eat a lot of protein, then a really good option would be like tofu, tempeh, or edamame.
Mm.
Those soy-based are some of the most highest in those amino acids. They most similar represent the other sources of protein that I just mentioned. Or getting just a variety of beans, like lentils are a great source, obviously, of protein and other micronutrients too, and fiber. Getting some black beans in there, things like that will help get your protein up too. And hemp seeds are another one. Hemp seeds are a little tricky because technically we're not supposed to recommend them to like college athletes for the potential risk of being drug tested and
Right.
something popping up. But hemp seeds are, if you're not drug tested, are another really, really good option. Simple thing to throw in for a little bit more protein.
And you'd have to eat a lot of hemp seeds, I think, for that to happen. And speaking about wanting to eat,
Seriously.
having this conversation, Angie, I'm getting hungry. So I knew that was going to happen as I'm flipping through the book and looking at the pictures in my notes in here. I'm like, oh man, I'm going to want to eat tonight. So coming back to, in terms of like, before we start getting into all the nutrition, just talk about, from your perspective, the importance of blood work and an athlete getting blood work and like a food sensitivity test to go, okay, do I have any food allergies? And is there anything that maybe I'm deficient in that I should either build into my diet or build into my supplementation routine? How important is that blood work and that food sensitivity testing, like before you really start diving into it?
Oh man, I am a huge fan of doing blood testing. Ideally, I mean, 3 to 4 times a year.
Wow.
I'd say it, well, we'll say 3 to 4 months, every 3 to 4 months, just because we're monitoring something. So it's similar to measuring something like body fat. We want to
Yep.
do that consistently too, probably, at least 2, if not 3 times a year.
Yep.
And so it's a really good way that we can make sure that the plan in place makes sense with what we're trying to achieve here. So I don't like just blindly subscribing or prescribing supplements to people. So like saying, okay, take 5,000 IU's vitamin D every day when I have no idea what their vitamin D levels are. Like, is that harmful to them? Is that helpful to them? And same with things like iron or magnesium or B12. Those are the 4 that I see most common deficiencies lie, especially with, I see this a lot in female athletes with iron, but I actually see B12 quite a bit too in male athletes. So
Yeah.
it just really depends on, the genetic makeup and everything else. So I say definitely do blood testing if you're not wanting to just go blindly into supplementation. It's
Yeah.
just, it's so helpful. And then that 3 to 4 months, we can test again, make sure that that amount is making sense, because if not, you may run into the issue like something like B12. Maybe you're supplementing with B12 and it hasn't improved at all. Okay, well, we've got to figure something else out. Maybe there's something else going on that we need to, monitor and whatnot, or something in the case of B12, of vitamin D. If that's not improving, like what can we do next to help this and move it along? So I think it's really important to get that testing done, be consistent with it, and then of course address those things with your diet as much as you can. Something like vitamin D is really hard to just be like, let's just get more vitamin D in your diet. Like, that's, you'd have to eat about, at least 10 eggs a day, or, salmon every single day to get even just 400 IU's of vitamin D. So it's really hard to meet that with just food alone. So that's a really important thing to monitor. And then cortisol levels in general. I think it's really important to measure things like inflammatory responses. I think it's important to measure, obviously, blood cholesterol, especially when you're looking at things like longevity of an athlete. It's just really important to look at all of those different biomarkers. Food sensitivity testing, I feel like has some pros and cons. I'm not 100% sold on, especially IgG testing, because I
Mm.
work a lot with gastrointestinal health. And in my instance, you look at IgE compared to IgG just doesn't have the same accuracy. And the one of the problems that we see with IgG is it has a lot of false positives when someone consumes that food either right before the test or
Yeah.
like several days leading up to the test. Like, let's say, for example, an athlete pops up with sunflower seeds, and maybe they had sunflower seeds the 5 days leading up to the test. Do they have a sensitivity to it, or is it because that antibody for that protein antibody was just present in the body because they just ate that food? So that's the issue that we see in the research too right now with those IgG testings, is just the high amount of false positives. And my concern with something like that is because if we have someone who is already maybe under fueling or not consuming enough food, and then they get this test back and it's got like, okay, now you can't eat 18 different foods, that's really limiting for them. And especially if they're constantly on the road and they don't have
Yeah.
access to a ton of other foods, like it's just, it's not the greatest, I think, way to really pinpoint the issue. Now, some other really good methods, especially if someone is having any sort of symptoms of like IBS or IBD, well, if they have IBD, but if they have symptoms of IBS, then something like a low FODMAP diet could be really helpful. And that helps to determine what their specific triggers are, just a little bit more accuracy. So that's another method. I do think that some athletes swear by the food sensitivity test. They really do think it helped. And I think, you know, hey, if it helps you, like, great, that's awesome.
Mm.
I just think that it definitely has some of those flaws to it, and it just doesn't have that level of consistent accuracy for me to be, you know, giving it out to everybody.
Yeah. We're here with Angie Asche, and you can check her out on Instagram. I want to make sure we mention that. It's at Eleat Nutrition. That's Eleat. I like what you did there. Eleat Nutrition. And you can also check out her website, which is going to be Eleat, again, spelled the same way, eleatnutrition.com. And if anybody's listening to this, athletes, coaches, they want you to come in and speak to their team, or someone's interested in you in working with you or a member of your team. I know you have other people that are working with you at Eleat Nutrition. What's the best way for people to contact you?
So directly from our website is number one, fill out the form, eleatnutrition.com/contact. You'll see it right there on the front page. That will get you directed to one of us right away, or you can email me to directly. It's just Angie@eleatnutrition.com.
Got it. We'll make sure we put that in the show notes. And then if they want to pick up the book, Fuel Your Body, best to get that through your website or send them to Amazon.
Either way, it'll probably be cheapest on Amazon. So I'll save you guys a couple bucks and send you to Amazon. But otherwise, yeah, you can go to my website and order it directly from there too.
Awesome. Angie, last question. If we could remove the skull cap of every athlete listening to this podcast, and you could plant one seed, just not a hemp seed, but if you could plant one seed inside of their brain that would germinate and that they would actually do coming off of this podcast, what would be that one seed of success that you would plant?
Oh man, be consistent with eating whole food sources.
Mm.
So plants, animals, a combination of both, I think is really good for overall health, and just trying to limit your intake of ultra processed foods, regardless of where you are in your career, is tremendously helpful. So
Yeah.
for performance, longevity, all the things. So eat more whole foods, I'd say.
Awesome. Angie, we're going to have to come back here and do part number 2. There's a lot more that I want to dive into. For everybody listening to this, check out Angie and link up with her at Eleat Nutrition on Instagram. That's ELEAT Nutrition. You can email her, Angie@eleatnutrition.com, her website, eleatnutrition.com, and check out her book, Fuel Your Body, on Amazon or at her website. Angie, thanks for being here and being a part of the mental performance mastery community. Thanks for being here and for what you're doing for all of our players.
Thanks for having me, Brian.